It was a bright, sunny afternoon in Los Angeles. The kind of day where the sun glares off the glass buildings and makes everything look like a movie set. In the middle of the city, there was a high-end car dealership known for selling some of the fastest and most expensive cars in the world. The place didn't just sell cars, it sold a lifestyle. The floors were so clean you could see your reflection in them, and the air smelled of expensive leather and fresh coffee. The salespeople walked around wearing suits that probably cost more than an average person's monthly rent. They were always looking over their shoulder, trying to spot the next big spender. Someone who would walk in and drop hundreds of thousands of dollars without blinking an eye. One of the senior salesmen at the dealership was a tall man who carried himself with a lot of attitude. He had spent years working his way up and believed he was an expert at reading people. To him, customers were divided into two categories: the whales who had money, and the tourists who were just there to waste time. He had no patience for the tourists. He stood near the entrance, watching the door like a hawk, waiting for a luxury car to pull up or someone wearing expensive jewelry to walk in. He wanted a quick sale, a big commission, and zero hassle. Around midday, the glass doors slid open and a man walked in. He didn't arrive in a limousine or a sports car. He actually looked like he had been walking for a while. He was wearing a very worn-out leather jacket, a pair of old jeans that had seen better days, and a scuffed baseball cap pulled low over his eyes. He looked like he had just come from a long motorcycle ride or maybe a hike in the hills. He didn't have a watch covered in diamonds, and he wasn't holding a briefcase. He just walked in with his hands in his pockets. Looking around quietly, this man was Keanu Reeves, one of the most famous actors in the world. But in that moment, without the movie lights and the makeup cameras, he looked like just another regular guy. Actually, he looked even simpler than that. He looked like someone who didn't care about flashing his money or showing off. He was there because he genuinely loved machines, especially cars and motorcycles. He had a passion for engines and the way things were built. Keanu walked past the shiny new sports cars that were spinning slowly on display platforms. He didn't stop at the bright red ones or the ones with the biggest price tags. He walked deeper into the showroom, toward a quieter corner where they kept the vintage cars. There, sitting alone, was a classic Porsche 911. It was a beautiful machine, restored to perfection, with a history behind it that car lovers would appreciate. Keanu stopped and stood in front of the car. He didn't touch it at first. He just looked at it. He admired the curve of the fender and the way the light hit the paint. You could see a small smile form on his face. To a car enthusiast, this wasn't just a piece of metal. It was a piece of art. The senior salesman was watching from a distance. When he saw the man in the worn jacket stop by the vintage Porsche, he rolled his eyes. He didn't see a movie star. He didn't see a successful man who had starred in blockbuster hits like The Matrix or John Wick. All he saw was a guy dressed in rags who probably couldn't afford to put gas in the car, let alone buy it. The salesman assumed Keanu was just a fan or someone who wandered in off the street to kill time, instead of ignoring him. Though the salesman decided to intervene. He walked over with a scowl on his face, his shoes clicking loudly against the marble floor. He wanted to scare this broke guy away before he could scare off the real customers. He didn't offer a greeting. He didn't ask if he could help. He walked right up to Keanu and stood too close, invading his personal space. "Hey, careful around there," the salesman said, his voice loud and rude. "That's a classic car. It's worth more than you make in a year." Keanu turned around slowly. He looked surprised by the tone, but he didn't get angry. He just looked the salesman in the eye and nodded respectfully. "It's a beautiful car," Keanu said softly. His voice was calm and polite. "I was just admiring the work. Do you know if the numbers on the engine match the chassis?" The salesman laughed. It was a mean, mocking laugh. He wanted to make sure Keanu felt small. "Look, buddy, this isn't a museum. You can't just come in here and stare. We're here to sell cars, not give tours to people who can't afford them. Why don't you go look at the motorcycles down the street? I think there's a second-hand shop that might be more your speed." A few people nearby turned their heads. A young couple who were looking at a sedan stopped talking and watched the scene unfold. They looked uncomfortable. Even a younger salesman who was standing by a desk in the back looked nervous. The young guy recognized Keanu immediately. His eyes went wide, and he opened his mouth to say something, but he was too scared of the senior salesman to speak up. But Keanu didn't make a scene. He didn't say, "Do you know who I am?" He didn't pull out his phone to prove his wealth. He simply looked back at the Porsche, appreciating the car one last time, ignoring the insult completely. He was used to people underestimating him, but he didn't expect such open hostility in a place of business. "I appreciate the art, regardless of who it belongs to," Keanu said calmly. He turned his back on the salesman and continued to look at the engine bay through the glass. He seemed to be in his own world, blocking out the negativity. This made the salesman even angrier. He felt ignored. He felt like his authority was being challenged by a guy in old clothes. He stepped forward again, this time reaching out as if he was going to physically grab Keanu's arm to move him away. "I'm talking to you," the salesman snapped, his face turning red. "You need to leave. You're blocking the view for customers who actually matter. I'm not going to tell you again. Get out before I call security and have you dragged out of here." The tension in the showroom was thick. The air felt heavy. Everyone was waiting to see what would happen. The salesman was sure he had won. He was sure he had scared off the poor guy and shown who was boss. But the reality of the situation was completely different from what he thought. He had no idea that he was currently humiliating one of the most decent and wealthy human beings on the planet. He had no idea that his behavior was about to blow up in his face in a way he never expected. As Keanu stood there, facing the car, the salesman smugly walked away to fetch a security guard, thinking the problem was solved. He had no clue that the clock was ticking down on his arrogance, and that the reveal was just around the corner. The silence of the showroom was about to be broken by a very loud reality check. The senior salesman didn't go far. He walked over to the coffee machine near the back of the showroom, his face still red with annoyance. He poured himself a cup, glancing back every few seconds to make sure the man in the worn-out leather jacket wasn't touching the paint on the vintage Porsche. The salesman was furious. In his mind, people like that were the reason he couldn't make his daily quota. They came in, they looked, they wasted valuable time, and then they left without buying anything. It was an insult to his profession. Meanwhile, Keanu remained standing by the car. He was completely unfazed by the outburst. He had a way of shutting out the noise of the world when he focused on something he loved. He leaned in slightly, looking at the intricate details of the engine bay through the glass. He wasn't pretending to know about cars. Over the years, he had spent countless hours riding motorcycles and working on his own vehicles. He understood the soul of a machine. To him, this Porsche wasn't just a status symbol. It was a piece of history that had been lovingly restored. After a minute, the salesman marched back, his coffee in hand. He wasn't going to let this go. He felt like he had lost control of the situation, and his ego wouldn't allow that. He wanted to prove to everyone in the showroom that he was the boss and that this bum needed to leave. He stopped right next to Keanu, invading his personal space again, and spoke loud enough for the couple looking at the sedan to hear. "Look, I don't have time for games," the salesman said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "You think by using big words like chassis, I'm going to believe you have money? I see people like you every day. You watch a few YouTube videos, memorize a few terms, and think you can come in here and act like a collector? It's pathetic." Keanu straightened up slowly. He didn't look angry, but there was a shift in his energy. He turned to face the salesman, looking him directly in the eyes. Keanu believed in being polite, but he also believed in being treated like a human being. He decided to try one more time to have a normal conversation. "I'm not pretending," Keanu said calmly. His voice was quiet but steady. "I actually have a lot of respect for the air-cooled engines. The sound they make is unique. I was just asking about the transmission because the shifter on these models can be a little tricky in second gear. I was wondering if this one had the updated linkage." The salesman let out a loud, exaggerated laugh. He turned his head looking for an audience. He wanted the other customers to laugh with him. He spotted the young trainee standing by the desk, looking nervous. The salesman smirked and pointed a finger at Keanu. "Did you hear this guy?" The salesman shouted across the showroom. "He's giving me a lesson on transmission linkages." "That's rich." He turned back to Keanu, his smile vanishing instantly. "Buddy, the only thing you know about transmissions is how to take the bus." "You're not fooling anyone." "That jacket looks like you found it in a dumpster." "And those boots?" "They're falling apart." "You can't afford the floor mats, let alone the car." The humiliation tactic was cruel and unnecessary. The air in the showroom grew heavy. The couple who had been looking at the sedan stopped talking altogether. The woman looked at the salesman with disgust, but he was too arrogant to notice. He was in his own world, fueled by the belief that he was superior because of the suit he was wearing and the watch on his wrist. Keanu stood there, taking it all in. He didn't shrink away. He didn't yell back. He simply looked at the salesman with a sense of pity. It was clear to Keanu that this man was deeply unhappy. Happy people don't go around trying to destroy strangers for no reason. Keanu knew who he was, and he knew what he had accomplished in his life. A rude car dealer couldn't take that away from him. But still, it hurt. It hurt to be treated like trash, to have his passion mocked, simply because of how he was dressed. "You seem very angry," Keanu said softly. "It wasn't an insult. It was an observation. I'm just here to look at a car. If I'm not allowed to do that, I'll leave." "But there's no need to be insulting." The salesman's face turned purple. He hated being analyzed. He hated that this nobody was trying to act like a psychologist. He slammed his hand down on the hood of the car, making a loud thud that echoed through the quiet building. "I don't need a lecture from you." The salesman yelled. "I am the senior sales executive here. I decide who looks and who buys. And I'm telling you, you are not welcome. You are bringing down the tone of this establishment. Real customers don't want to shop next to someone who looks like they just crawled out from under a bridge." By this point, the young trainee by the desk was sweating. He recognized the face. He had seen the Matrix movies a dozen times. He knew exactly who was standing there getting yelled at. The trainee looked at the salesman, wondering how he could be so blind. But the salesman had built a reputation for being terrifying to work with. The trainee was afraid that if he spoke up, he would lose his job. So he just stood there, conflicted, clutching a folder of brochures against his chest. The salesman, sensing that he had won, stepped even closer to Keanu. He poked a finger into Keanu's chest. It was a physical threat, a line that should never be crossed in a business environment. "I'm going to count to 3, the salesman growled, his voice low and dangerous. "And if you aren't out that door, I'm calling the police. I'll have you arrested for trespassing. I don't care if I have to drag you out myself. 1. Keanu looked down at the finger poking his chest, then back up at the salesman. He didn't move. He didn't reach for his phone. He didn't threaten to sue. He just stood there with incredible patience. It was the kind of patience that comes from facing much bigger problems in life than a rude car dealer. He had faced tragedy, loss, and immense pressure in his career. This was just a bump in the road. 2? The salesman continued, spit flying from his mouth. He was enjoying this now. He felt powerful. He felt like he was cleaning up the showroom. Just as the salesman opened his mouth to say 3, the main glass doors at the entrance of the dealership swung open again. A chime rang out through the sound system, signaling a new arrival. The salesman paused, annoyed that his moment was being interrupted. He expected it to be another time waster. The woman who walked in was impossible to ignore. She was dressed in high fashion, carrying a designer bag, wearing oversized sunglasses. She radiated money and confidence. She was a well-known figure in Los Angeles, a regular on the society pages, and a friend to many in the industry. She walked in like she owned the place. The salesman's mood changed instantly. He wiped the angry look off his face and replaced it with a fake, slimy smile. He straightened his tie and turned his back on Keanu, completely ignoring him now that real money had walked in. He abandoned the threat of security and rushed toward the woman, his arms wide open. "Good afternoon. Welcome. The salesman chirped, his voice sickeningly sweet. "It is such a pleasure to see you. How can we help you today?" Keanu stood alone by the Porsche again. He took a deep breath, ready to finally leave the toxic environment. He had seen enough. He put his hands back in his pockets and turned to walk toward the exit. He didn't want a confrontation. He just wanted to go home, but the woman in the sunglasses didn't look at the salesman. She walked right past him, ignoring his outstretched hand. She scanned the showroom, her eyes moving quickly over the cars until they landed on the man in the worn leather jacket walking away. Her face lit up under the glasses. She smiled a genuine, warm smile that the salesman could never replicate. She ignored the senior executive completely, which confused him. He stood there with his hands in the air, looking foolish. The woman walked straight toward Keanu, her heels clicking rapidly on the floor. The showroom went silent. The couple by the sit-in stopped to watch. The trainee held his breath. The woman reached out and gently touched Keanu's arm to stop him. The salesman froze, watching the scene, confused by what was happening. Why was this wealthy, famous woman chasing after the guy in the ripped jeans? Keanu stopped and turned around. His face softened when he saw who it was. "Oh, hello," he said kindly. "Keanu," she exclaimed, her voice full of delight. "I haven't seen you in ages. I was hoping I'd run into you at this event, but I never thought I'd find you hiding in a car dealership." The salesman's jaw dropped. He stood frozen in the middle of the floor, his mouth hanging open. He looked from the woman to the bum in the leather jacket. His brain was struggling to process the information. He heard the name again. Keanu. Suddenly, the features clicked into place. The nose, the beard, the sad eyes. It wasn't some random guy off the street. It was the star of John Wick. It was the man who was famous all over the world. And worse, he was a man known for being one of the nicest, most decent people in Hollywood. The color drained from the salesman's face so fast he looked like he might pass out. He looked down at his expensive shoes, then at the Porsche, then at the crowd of customers who were now staring at him with judgment in their eyes. He realized in a heartbeat that his life was about to get very complicated. The reveal had happened, and it was the last thing he had expected. The silence that fell over the showroom was absolute. It was the kind of silence that feels heavy, like the air pressure suddenly dropped. You could hear the faint hum of the air conditioning system and the distant sound of traffic from the street outside. But inside, nobody moved. The name the woman had spoken hung in the air like smoke. Keanu. The wealthy woman beamed at him, her smile wide and genuine. She reached out and took both of his hands in hers, shaking them warmly. For a moment, the awkwardness of the previous 20 minutes seemed to dissolve, replaced by her excitement. "It is so good to see you," she said, her voice echoing slightly in the large open space. "I feel like it's been forever since the last premiere. How have you been? You look great, although." She gestured playfully at his worn-out jacket. "A little rough around the edges today, huh?" Keanu smiled back, a small, humble smile that reached his eyes. "You know me," he said softly. "I'm just happy to be out and about." "It's nice to see you, too. You're looking as vibrant as always." The salesman was still frozen in the middle of the floor. He looked like a statue that was starting to crack. His brain was trying desperately to catch up with reality. Only seconds ago, he had been the king of this castle, belittling a nobody he thought was beneath him. Now, the dynamic had flipped entirely. The nobody was a global icon, and the salesman was the villain in a story that was about to be witnessed by a room full of people. The color had drained completely from his face. He felt a cold sweat break out on his forehead. His heart, which had been pounding with arrogance just moments ago, was now hammering against his ribs with pure panic. He looked at the man standing in front of him, the man he had called pathetic and trash, and really looked at him for the first time. He saw the calm demeanor, the gentle eyes, and the famous profile that was on posters in millions of bedrooms around the world. It was undeniable. It was the face of the star of The Matrix, Speed, and John Wick, the woman. Sensing a shift in the mood, turned her head slowly toward the salesman. Her expensive sunglasses slid down her nose just a bit, revealing eyes that were sharp and calculating. She took in his terrified expression, his open mouth, and the way he was sweating through his expensive shirt. She looked back at Keanu, then at the vintage Porsche, and finally the realization clicked. She had walked in late, but she knew human behavior. She could feel the negativity in the room. "Keanu?" she asked, her voice dropping an octave, becoming more serious. "Did I interrupt something? You look like you were heading toward the door." Keanu looked down at his boots for a second, then back at his friend. He didn't want to make a scene. That wasn't his style. He believed in privacy and dignity. He took a deep breath and shrugged lightly. "I was just admiring this beautiful 911, he said, gesturing toward the car. "I was asking about the engine history, but—" He paused, glancing briefly at the salesman, then away. "I think I've overstayed my welcome. The gentleman here was just explaining that this isn't the right place for me." The woman's eyebrows shot up. She turned fully toward the salesman, crossing her arms. Her posture was defensive now. She was ready to go to battle for her friend. "Is that so?" she asked, her voice icy. The salesman swallowed hard. His throat felt dry, like sandpaper. He took a stumbling step forward, his hands shaking. I, he stammered. He couldn't form a coherent sentence. The arrogant confidence from before had vanished. Replaced by a stuttering mess, the other customers in the showroom were now fully tuned in. The young couple by the sedan had pulled out their phones, recording the interaction. The junior trainee by the desk was staring openly, his mouth slightly open in shock. He was watching his boss, the man who demanded respect, shrink into nothing in front of his eyes. "You didn't recognize him?" the woman asked, her voice cutting through the air like a knife. "One of the most famous actors on the planet. A man who is known worldwide for his kindness and his love for motorcycles and cars, and you didn't recognize him? Or did you recognize him and just decide to be cruel anyway?" The salesman tried to salvage the situation. He forced a nervous, ugly laugh. I honestly didn't recognize him, ma'am. He was dressed so casually, I thought he was just... Look, we get a lot of people coming in here who can't afford these cars. I have to protect the inventory." Keanu stepped in before the woman could unleash her anger. He placed a hand gently on her arm to calm her down. "It's okay," he said to her. "Really, it's a misunderstanding. I know I don't look like the typical customer here." He turned his attention to the salesman. Keanu wasn't angry, but he was firm. He wanted to make a point, not destroy a life, but he needed the man to understand the gravity of his prejudice. "You know," Keanu said, his voice quiet but carrying across the room, "the way a person looks doesn't tell you anything about who they are or what they value. I could have been wearing a tuxedo, or I could have been wearing rags. It shouldn't matter. I came in here with respect for your establishment and for the cars. I asked a technical question because I genuinely wanted to know. I didn't come here to be insulted." The salesman stood there, head hanging low. He felt the weight of Keanu's words. They weren't said with hate, which somehow made them hurt even more. They were said with truth. He realized that he hadn't just insulted a movie star. He had insulted a human being for no reason. And the worst part was, the bum he had insulted was showing more class in this moment of defeat than the salesman had shown in his moment of power. The woman looked at the salesman with pure disgust. "You just lost the easiest sale of your life," she said to him. "Keanu buys cars like this for fun. He restores them. He races them. He knows more about this vehicle than you ever will. And you just kicked him out because of his jacket?" She turned back to Keanu, ignoring the salesman completely now. "Keanu, please don't go. Let's go find the manager. This is unacceptable. You shouldn't have to deal with this kind of disrespect." Keanu shook his head gently. No need for that. I'm fine." He looked at the salesman one last time. "I think the lesson has been learned. Hopefully, next time, you'll give someone a chance before you judge them." The tension in the room was slowly starting to deflate, replaced by a sense of awe. People were watching Keanu Reeves, the action hero, handle a verbal assault with the grace of a philosopher. The salesman, once the predator, was now the prey, trapped by his own ugliness in front of an audience that was fully against him. He wanted the floor to open up and swallow him whole. He knew that before the day was over, this story would be all over the internet. He was already imagining the headlines, the negative reviews, and the phone call from his boss that was surely coming. The reveal had changed everything, turning his moment of triumph into a lifetime of regret. The salesman's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. He was trying to find the right words to fix the disaster that had just exploded in his face, but nothing came out. His brain was racing, trying to calculate a way out of the situation, but there was no exit. He looked at Keanu, then at the woman, and then at the growing crowd of customers who were all watching him with a mixture of shock and disappointment. The silence in the room was deafening, broken only by the sound of the salesman's own shallow breathing. I am so sorry," the salesman finally managed to choke out. His voice was weak, a complete contrast to the booming arrogance he had displayed just minutes ago. He took a step closer to Keanu, his hands trembling in front of him. "Mr. Reeves, sir, I honestly had no idea. If I had known who you were, I never would have spoken to you that way. Please, you have to understand, we get so many people coming in here just to look." Keanu held up a hand to stop him. It was a gentle gesture, but it carried the weight of authority. He didn't look angry, but his eyes were serious. He looked at the salesman with a calmness that was more intimidating than any shout could ever be. "Does it matter who I am?" Keanu asked. His voice was soft, but it cut through the salesman's excuse like a hot knife through butter. "If I was just a regular guy, a teacher or a mechanic who loved cars and wanted to look at this engine, would it have been okay to treat me that way? Would it have been okay to humiliate me and insult my clothes?" The salesman stood frozen, his mouth slightly open. He didn't have an answer. He knew the answer was no, but he couldn't bring himself to say it. He was trapped in the realization of his own prejudice. Keanu continued, looking around the showroom at the other people who were watching. "You judged me by the jacket I'm wearing and the boots on my feet. You decided I wasn't worth your time. You decided I was trash that isn't about customer service. That is about how you see people." The wealthy woman beside Keanu nodded firmly. She stepped up, standing shoulder to shoulder with him. "He's right," she said, her voice sharp. "You didn't just insult a movie star today. You insulted a human being. And what makes it worse is that Keanu here is probably one of the most knowledgeable car guys you will ever meet. He wasn't pretending to know about the transmission. He knows more about this Porsche than you do. He has a collection that would make your head spin." She turned to the salesman, her eyes flashing. "Do you know he was looking at this car because he's thinking of buying a vintage vehicle for a charity auction? He was going to buy it to help raise money for children's hospitals. But you were too busy judging his jacket to care about that." The revelation hit the room like a ton of bricks. The couple who had been looking at the sedan gasped audibly. Even the junior trainee by the desk looked stunned. The idea that the man the salesman had kicked out was not only a megastar, but also a philanthropist who wanted to buy the car for charity made the salesman's behavior look even uglier, if that was even possible. It wasn't just a mistake. It was a failure of character. The salesman felt his knees go weak. He grabbed the edge of a nearby desk to steady himself. He looked at the vintage Porsche, then back at Keanu, and the full weight of his mistake crashed down on him. He had ruined a potential sale that would have been great for the dealership and great for charity, all because of his own ego. He felt small. Not just small in stature, but small as a person. He felt insignificant standing next to Keanu, who carried himself with a quiet dignity that money couldn't buy. I didn't know," the salesman whispered again, sounding defeated. I was trying to do my job." "No," Keanu said quietly. "You weren't doing your job. Your job is to welcome people. Your job is to share your passion for these machines. Instead, you used your position to make someone else feel small. That isn't power. That's just being a bully." Keanu didn't say the words to be cruel. He said them because they were true. He believed that people needed to hear the truth sometimes to grow. But there was no malice in his tone. He was simply stating facts. The atmosphere in the showroom had completely shifted. The salesman was no longer the predator. He was the one being scrutinized. He felt the eyes of every customer burning into him. He could see them shaking their heads. He saw the young trainee looking at him with disappointment, which somehow hurt more than anything else. He realized that in 5 minutes he had destroyed the reputation he had built over years. He was no longer the successful senior salesman. He was the guy who was mean to Keanu Reeves. The woman reached out and touched Keanu's arm again. "Keanu, don't let him ruin your day. He's not worth it. Let's go get something to eat. I know a great place just down the street." Keanu looked at her and smiled, a genuine smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes. "You know what? That sounds like a great idea. I think I've seen enough cars for today." He turned to walk away. The salesman panicked. He couldn't let it end like this. He had to do something, anything, to try and fix it. Maybe if he gave him the car, maybe if he offered a discount. "Wait." The salesman called out, his voice desperate. He hurried around the desk, stumbling a little in his expensive shoes. "Mr. Reeves, please. Wait, look, take the car." "The Porsche." "Take it, no charge." "Well, half price or—" "Just take it. I'll talk to the manager. I'll make it happen. Consider it an apology, please." It was a pathetic offer. He was trying to use money to solve a problem that money couldn't fix. He was trying to buy forgiveness. The showroom went silent again. Everyone watched to see how Keanu would react. Keanu stopped walking. He turned around slowly and looked at the salesman. He looked at the man who had been so arrogant just moments ago, who was now begging and offering free cars. It was a sad sight. Keanu didn't feel joy seeing the man grovel. He just felt tired. "Money isn't the issue," Keanu said softly. He looked past the salesman, toward the exit. "I can afford any car in this room. That isn't why I'm leaving. I'm leaving because I don't want to give my business to someone who doesn't respect people. If I take this car now, it feels like I'm rewarding your behavior. And I can't do that." He paused, looking the salesman directly in the eyes one last time. "You have a beautiful showroom. You have amazing cars. But none of that matters if you don't have respect for the people walking through the door. You should think about that." With that, Keanu turned his back. The conversation was over. There was nothing more to say. The salesman stood there, his mouth hanging open, his hand reaching out into empty air. He watched Keanu walk away, surrounded by an invisible shield of dignity. The woman glared at the salesman one last time, shook her head in disgust, and followed Keanu toward the glass doors. As they walked, the young couple stepped aside to let them pass, whispering excitedly. The junior trainee couldn't hold back any longer. He stepped out from behind his desk, ignoring the panicked look his boss shot him. He quickly grabbed a notepad and a pen, rushing toward Keanu. "Mr. Reeves," the young man said, his voice nervous but enthusiastic. I just wanted to say I'm a huge fan, and I'm sorry about him. He doesn't represent all of us. I love your movies, and I think what you said was awesome." Keanu stopped and smiled at the young man. He saw the genuine admiration in his eyes, and it warmed him. He reached out and shook the young trainee's hand. "Thank you, kid. Don't let him change you. Keep your passion for the cars." "I will," the trainee promised. "And if you ever want to look at cars again or need anything, just ask for me. I'm here every day." Keanu gave him a nod. "I appreciate that." The trainee beamed, standing a little taller as Keanu and the woman walked out the doors. As the glass slid shut behind them, the sound of the city filtered back in. Inside the showroom, the silence returned, but now it was heavy with judgment. The salesman was left standing alone in the middle of the expensive floor, surrounded by luxury cars that he couldn't sell, watched by customers who now despised him. He slowly lowered his hand, the reality of his situation sinking in. He hadn't just lost a sale. He had lost his self-respect all in the span of a single afternoon. And he knew, with a sinking feeling in his stomach, that this was a story he would never live down. The glass doors slid shut, sealing off the warmth of the California sun. But the atmosphere inside the showroom had turned freezing cold. The silence that followed Keanu Reeves' exit was heavy and suffocating. It wasn't a peaceful silence. It was the kind that happens right after a loud crash when everyone is too shocked to speak. The salesman stood alone in the center of the pristine floor, surrounded by cars that cost more than most houses. Yet he felt like the poorest man in the room. He stood there with his mouth slightly open, staring at the empty space where the actor had just been standing. His expensive shoes suddenly felt uncomfortable, his tight collar seemed to be choking him, and the suit that he thought gave him power now felt like a costume. He looked around the room, desperate for someone to say something, to break the spell, to tell him that everything was going to be okay, but nobody did. The young couple by the sedan were shaking their heads. The woman was whispering something to her husband, and they both looked at the salesman with undisguised disappointment. They picked up their belongings and walked toward the door, but not before the husband turned and gave the salesman a look of pure disgust. Another customer who had been browsing a convertible just laughed out loud, a harsh, mocking sound, and walked out as well. The showroom was emptying out, not because the cars were bad, but because the person selling them had shown his true colors. The junior trainee was still standing by his desk, looking down at his paperwork, afraid to make eye contact. The salesman could feel the judgment radiating from the young man. It was the worst feeling of all. He had always treated the trainee like he was invisible, unimportant, and less than him. Now, the trainee had witnessed his complete and total humiliation. The power dynamic had shattered. Suddenly, the door to the manager's office swung open violently. The manager stormed out, his face red and his tie loosened. He had been watching everything on the security cameras from the safety of his office, and he had seen enough. He marched across the marble floor, his footsteps echoing like gunshots in the quiet room. "What did you do?" The manager hissed, getting right in the salesman's face. He didn't need to shout. His voice was trembling with barely contained rage. "Tell me you did not just kick Keanu Reeves out of my dealership. Tell me you did not insult him, threaten to call the police, and then offer him a free car when you realized who he was." The salesman stammered, his voice weak and pathetic. I didn't recognize him. He looked homeless. "I was just doing my job. I was trying to protect the inventory." "Protect the inventory?" The manager roared, losing his temper. "He's a billionaire. He could have bought the entire inventory. And instead of being a professional, you acted like a bully." "I watched the whole thing. You humiliated him. You humiliated this dealership." The manager looked around the empty showroom. The customers were gone. The vibe was ruined. He looked back at the salesman with eyes that held no mercy. "Go home," the manager said, his voice dropping to a deadly whisper. "Just go. Don't bother clearing your desk. I'll have your final check mailed to you. You are done here." The salesman stood frozen, his eyes wide. "You're firing me? Over a misunderstanding?" "It wasn't a misunderstanding," the manager said coldly. "It was a reflection of your character. Get out." Slowly, the salesman turned and walked toward the door. He walked past the vintage Porsche, the car that had started it all. He looked at it one last time, but it didn't look beautiful to him anymore. It just looked like a reminder of his own arrogance. He pushed open the glass doors and stepped out into the bright sunlight, but he didn't feel the warmth. He felt alone. He got into his own car-leased luxury sedan that he was barely making payments on and drove away, wondering how his entire life had fallen apart in less than 20 minutes. Meanwhile, back inside, the atmosphere began to shift. The manager took a deep breath, trying to calm himself. He turned his attention to the junior trainee, who was still standing nervously by his desk. The manager's expression softened. The trainee hadn't done anything wrong. In fact, he had been the only decent human being in the entire encounter. "You okay, kid?" The manager asked. The trainee nodded, though he looked shaken. "Yeah, I can't believe he talked to him like that. It was painful to watch." The manager sighed and ran a hand through his hair. "Well, it's a mess, but we have to keep moving. We lost a huge opportunity today, but hopefully the press won't be too bad. Although, he looked at the security cameras, I have a feeling this story is going to get out. Just then, the phone on the trainee's desk rang. It was a harsh, jarring sound in the quiet room. The trainee looked at the manager, who motioned for him to pick it up. Hello? Luxury Motors, this is the trainee desk, the young man said, his voice shaky. He listened for a moment, his eyes going wide. He stood up straighter. He looked over at the manager, his mouth dropping open in surprise. Yes. Yes, of course. I can certainly help you with that. The blue one? Yes, it's still here. Actually, I can bring it around front for you right now if you'd like. The trainee listened for another minute, a smile slowly spreading across his face. It wasn't just a polite smile. It was a genuine look of joy. Thank you, sir. That means a lot to me, really. Okay, I'll see you in 10 minutes. Goodbye. The trainee hung up the phone, his hand trembling slightly. He looked at the manager, his eyes shining. Who was that? The manager asked, confused. That was Mr. Reeves, the trainee said, his voice barely a whisper. He's coming back. The manager blinked. He's what? Is he coming to yell at us? No, the trainee laughed, a sound of pure disbelief. He said he didn't want to give that salesman the satisfaction of buying the car from him, and he didn't want to support a place that treats people that way. But he said he saw that I was trying to be respectful, and he appreciated that. The trainee took a deep breath. He wants to buy a car. He wants to buy it from me. He said he's going to buy the vintage Mustang we have in the back lot. He said he wants to do the paperwork with me so I get the full commission. The manager stared at the trainee, then a slow smile broke out on his face too. It was a moment of redemption. The cruelty of one man was being washed away by the kindness of another. The universe had a way of balancing things out. 10 minutes later, Keanu Reeves pulled up on his motorcycle. He didn't make a grand entrance. He didn't bring cameras or an entourage. He parked his bike, took off his helmet, and walked into the showroom. His demeanor was calm and friendly. As if the earlier incident hadn't even happened, he shook hands with the manager, apologizing for the scene, even though he had nothing to apologize for. Then he turned his attention to the young trainee. He spent 20 minutes talking to the kid about the Mustang. He didn't talk down to him. He asked for his opinion. They looked at the engine together. Keanu listened to the young man explain the car's history, nodding respectfully. When it came time to sign the papers, Keanu didn't haggle over the price. He paid fair market value. He didn't ask for special favors or a discount because of who he was. He just wanted a fair deal. As they stood by the counter finishing the paperwork, Keanu looked at the trainee. You know, he said softly, don't let anyone change you. That guy earlier, he was full of fear. He was afraid of looking weak, so he tried to make others feel small. You don't need to live like that. Be passionate about what you do. Treat people well. That's how you succeed. The trainee nodded, feeling like he was getting advice worth more than any amount of money. I will, I promise. Thank you, Mr. Reeves. Call me Keanu, the actor said with a smile. He shook the young man's hand one last time, signed the check, and took the keys. As he drove the vintage Mustang out of the showroom, the sun was shining bright. The sale wasn't just a transaction. It was a lesson. It was a reminder that no matter how much money you have or how expensive your suit is, your true value is determined by how you treat other people. The salesman had lost everything because he thought he was better than everyone else. Keanu, who had every reason to be arrogant, remained humble and kind, and in doing so, he changed a young man's life. The story of that day would spread around the city. It would be told in dealerships and coffee shops. It wouldn't be a story about a famous actor buying a car. It would be a story about the day a bully was defeated by kindness, and how the most powerful person in the room was the one wearing the worn-out leather jacket.